long.
That is Jacob's brother.
Lots more grandchildren, Elliot.
Listen,
Lots more grandchildren.
Father of Jacob.
Jacob.
Yeah. So here you've got three. You've got all the branches, of which the three of them here today.
my father was interested in the Matz family.
Yeah.
And he, when I was maybe 12, he took me to interview Jack Cohen, was born in the village in Lithuania that we're all descended from, which is called Rumshashuk.
Yeah.
And he remembered many people's names and lots of information. And we took down notes. And I converted it into a chart by hand in 1969 or something like that, until the internet came along. And then I put the family tree on family tree software. We put it on the internet, and people started making queries as to whether they were related. This one is the mother of the guy who's in Florida now.
And your mother's room.
She said she was going out. I think she went shopping.
On a birthday.
Jacob Matz. My grandmother was the eldest child, Bertha. Gillian's grandmother.
What's the name of your grandmother?
Edith. Gillian's grandfather was Dave Hart, and I have some stories to tell about Dave Hart, who I remember very well.
When did you come here?
To Israel?
Yeah.
My mother was born here.
Right.
And my father, that is the relative, he came to Israel in 1929.
Right.
To ask Elliot.
But you are a Matz.
Yeah, and from my father's side, my father's mother.
Right.
Julian and Sonia.
That's definitely Emily. That's, you know, when she was little, she looked like Emily.
So my great-grandfather was Baruch Salman, and he stayed in Rosh Hashanah. But several of his children left. One was my grandfather, who went to Boston, a mixing of Jews and non-Jews in Canada, and decided to go back to Rosh Hashanah. Then there's Ita, from whom you're descended, who married Lapyansky. And I don't know much about her except that when we interviewed Jack Cohen, which is how this all started, just had this uncanny memory for names and dates and people, and we interviewed him maybe in 1969, and had information about the British family and about the people back in Rosh Hashanah and about people in the Netherlands and other places. He would tell people's names, but he would also say an anecdote about them if he remembered. What he said about his grandmother, Ita, was that she was a poor woman, but she said she had joy of life. She had the joie de vivre, and he adored her. People in the town were in the business in the lumber business. They floated lumber, wood, logs. They floated logs down the river, I guess, and some intellectuals, maybe some priests, and herded them outside of the town to some pit or ravine, or sometimes they made them dig the pit, and then they shot them into the ravine. After the war, when the Soviets took over Lithuania, and they decided to build a hydroelectric dam on the Neman River, which they did. And it created a lake, as they do, and the lake flooded Rumshashok and other towns. A colleague of mine took a cruise in the Baltic Sea and came back with this list of optional day trips you could take. I thought, oh my God, one of the day trips was Rumshashok. And I just couldn't not take that opportunity to go. It's just at the end of the communist period, and we arranged to go to Lithuania with an in-tourist guide and a drive. Ended up with a wonderful young woman who was our in-tourist guide, who was Lithuanian, and there was no love lost between the Lithuanians and the Russians. So she was very happy to help us any way she could. But we also went into the new town, and she offered to translate and to try to find someone who was old enough to remember before the war, and remember the Jews, and maybe remember the Matzes. The caretaker of the church, I have photos of this too, I don't know if I have them, and eventually charmed her into talking about her childhood before the war. And she said she did remember the Jews. She said she thinks her parents worked for Jews, and she remembered when the Jews were marched out of town. It was a very moving day, to say the least. But she did not remember the name Matz.
My grandmother was Bertha was the eldest, and one of the 8 children is Adrian's grandmother, Rose, and another is Edith. 2 of the 8 children were pharmacists, chemists, and they were the first Jewish chemists in Manchester, Sol and Max. And I know where their shops were, their chemist shops, and I used to go to their chemist shops, and they were very great people there. But I remember him especially when he was in his late 80s, because I was a student, and I used to meet him. He drove car in his late 80s. He used to take me to the Cardoma Cafe, which was, and in the back room of the Cardoma were mainly, although we were Ashkenazi, in the back room were mainly Sephardic Jews from Middle Eastern countries who were merchants, shipping merchants and textile merchants. And they used to smoke in the Cardoma, big cigars, who were playing some game like drafts.
And look at that photograph.
But we can't
I think that's Auntie
identify
Emily.
them.
You don't think that's Emily?
I have some others that
We don't.
Isn't it wonderful?
We don't know who they are.
What a picture. Which is one of the classic books of cantorial synagogue.
do people still like
And I
study
just,
it?
have you got a picture of the...
I have.
Oh, now it's the, oh, that's it.
That's the great.
That's the great memory of our dear and beloved father, the Reverend Jacob Matz.
15, age 64.
Wow, that's very
Relatives.
deeply mourned by his children, grandchildren, relatives, congregants, and friends.
I have a photo of that from Germany, I think.
I'll send you